Welcome to this week's Qdabra webinar. My name is Jennifer Lindsay. I am an InfoPath developer and a project manager here at Qdabra. And today's webinar is going to focus on a number of techniques for migrating your InfoPath investment. And we'll be talking about some tips and tricks for basically allowing you to upgrade your template and move forms over from the old template to the new template, and also moving your data out of the library that it's in and even into SQL for reporting capabilities. Before we get started, for those of you who are new, a little bit about Qdabra. We are one of the foremost SharePoint, InfoPath, and eForms consulting companies out there today. If you have any questions about SharePoint or InfoPath or eForm development in general, you can visit our community website, infopathdEV.com. This is a great forum that contains weekly blogs and a bunch of downloads that you can save to your computer and use to get started in various techniques. And there's also a forum where you can post questions, and we try to answer those within a 24 to 48 hour period. It's a great place to go if you have a quick question that needs answering. If you need a little more heavy-duty support, we do have pay-as-you-go support options and packages where you can purchase a certain number of hours up front and then use them as you're working through a project if you get stuck. And if you have a large project that's rather complicated and has a bunch of different requirements, we do consulting work for hire as well. We have 3 InfoPath MVPs on staff and a number of other InfoPath developers such as myself that can help you get started on the right track and complete that huge project on time. Okay, let's dive into the topics for today. So as I said before, we're focusing on migrating InfoPath forms. The first 2 techniques we'll be looking at are side-by-side versioning and manual conversion with links. So side-by-side versioning is a great out-of-the-box method. You don't need any additional bells and whistles. You can do this strictly with InfoPath and SharePoint. However, the problem is that you end up with multiple templates and forms that open in different templates, so there's no consolidated reporting that you can do using that technique. With the manual conversion with links technique, your existing forms basically get upgraded to the new template. So you eventually end up with old forms that got filled out with an old template, moved over to the new template in addition to new forms filled out using the new template. And so you can do consolidated reporting. The cons for this technique is that you either need code or you can use our QRules plugin for InfoPath that has a nice built-in command that will do the same thing as code will. Now there are 2 more complicated techniques that use our DBXL software. One of them is batch conversion using the free DBXL Migration Tool that comes along with a DBXL. And again, your existing forms will all get upgraded to the new template if you make changes to your template. And unlike the previous version with links, which is a per form upgrade, you can upgrade all of the templates at once with the click of a button. However, in order to do this, you must have our DBXL software product. And you also need to manually create a particular file called an XSL transform. And this can take anywhere from 4 to 20 hours. And you really have to be at least somewhat familiar with XML markup language in order to do this. However, this is a better way to go than per form upgrades with the links that I talked about on the previous slide, because if you have, say, 5 or 10,000 forms that you need to upgrade, putting in 4 or 8 hours up front to create the transform and then clicking a button and migrating over all 10,000 forms at once is going to be a lot easier than using the simpler link technique and doing each form by hand. And the last technique we're going to be looking at today is migrating only the data contained in the InfoPath forms. So for example, if you want to put a SQL backend on things and do reporting, more robust reporting based on SQL tables, you can use this particular solution as well, and the one I'm going to demonstrate today actually uses a more recent version of DBXL that's specifically set up to be cloud-based. So you can put your SQL database into Windows Azure as opposed to creating your own instance on your own servers. And really the only con, which we at Qdabra don't really see as a con, but you might, is that you do need to purchase our DBXL software product in order to use this method. So let's go just a little bit into why you would want to do this. Based on what I've said already, you can probably think of some reasons. The main one is that forms and templates are not static. So when you're designing a template, as much as you would love for that to be the final version that will always be used from here on out, chances are that you're going to end up having to revisit that template and delete some fields, move some fields around underneath different folders, rename fields, changing their data types, and all sorts of other changes that you might make to the schema or the logic that determines how the form operates. And depending on how many changes and what changes you make, this can lead to loss of data. If you change the template, old forms that the new template tries to open up, it may just have no clue what to do with some of this old data that's stored using fields that make no sense to the new template. And you may just lose that data. It'll be hidden behind the scenes in the form and you won't be able to access it. And usually the built-in InfoPath upgrading functionality can take care of this, but if you make too many changes and if your changes are too drastic to the template structure, this built-in upgrading functionality can definitely break, in which case the techniques I'm going to show you today can be very useful to recapture that data. And of course, another big reason for using these techniques is that data reentry is very tedious. You really don't want to be wasting your employees' time or your own time sitting there and hand copying over data from old forms into new forms, especially if you have hundreds or even thousands of forms to deal with. It's just a waste of money and time, and it's extremely impractical. All right. Let's take a closer look at what's going on with the first two techniques, side-by-side versioning and migrating with links. So with side-by-side versioning, what you're doing is you have a single form library for all your forms. However, you're associating two different templates with that form library. One template is going to be associated with the old forms in that library, or the forms that already exist, and then you have your new template, which is the upgraded version or the updated version of your old template. You're going to associate that with the same library, and then all of the new forms that are created from here on out will be associated with that template. So you'll still be able to open all of your old forms and your new forms from the exact same library. With the migrating with links technique, what you're going to do is in the old template, you're going to create a link to a new form using the new template. Clicking that link will open up the new form, and then we're going to use some QRules commands to pull in the data from the old form and display it in the new form. And you can use this migrating with links techniques either to move data from forms in one library to new forms in a different library, or you can use the same sort of trick by the side-by-side versioning and associate both the new and the old template with the same library and use the link to pull the old data into the new form. So let's go ahead and take a look at demos of these two particular techniques. Let me find, okay, so this is the demo for the side-by-side versioning. Now here I am in my library and I have two forms here, and you may say these forms look, more or less identical. Obviously there are different timestamps, but nothing really stands out to say one is different from the other. If I open up this first form here, which I'm going to open up in a new tab, here we go. It should open up in just a few seconds here. Maybe a few more seconds. I should have made sure that SharePoint had its coffee this morning. Here we go. So here is the first form in that library, and notice that it says version 1 up here. This is the form opening up that was created in the old template, and it's opening up using the old template. I've got a name and a phone number field down here, and in my repeating table, notice I have 3 fields: description, status, and priority. Now, if I go back to the library and open up the second form, when this opens up, you will see that instead of version 1, it says version 2 here. And that's because this was a form that was created a little later using the new template that I activated to the same form library. And you'll see we've made some changes to the schema. We've added a new company field down here, and we've also added a date-time field to this repeating table down here at the bottom. So comparing these two forms side by side, you can see that there are definitely differences. And yet, we created both of these forms and submitted them to the exact same library. So what's going on behind the scenes? Well, what we've done is use a built-in feature of InfoPath called content types. And a content type is basically, think of it as an InfoPath template that can be associated with any library on your site. Usually, you publish a template to a specific form library, and only forms that are opened up from that library will be opened using that template. However, with a content type, you can manually associate that content type with any library on your site. Let me just walk through some of the publishing wizard steps here to show you. And here's how you do that. Instead of selecting form library, which is what most of you are probably used to, you select site content type. And the next screen will take you to a list of all of the different content types that are available on your site. In this case, the one I want already exists, so I just update it. And you usually specify a location for the template to reside on your site. And I usually just save mine to the shared documents library that comes with most default SharePoint sites or subsites that you create. But you can make any sort of document library you want and save these content type templates to that library. The next thing you do after publishing is activate the content type to the site, and I won't go through those steps because we do have limited time here in today's webinar, but you can look up activating a content type to a SharePoint site. If you Google that, it'll come up with the steps for you to do that. And once you've done that, go to your library, the library that you want to associate that content type with, and under Library Settings, if you go to Advanced Settings, you'll notice at the very top there's a question about allowing management of content types. Now, the default for a new form library is no. What you need to do is select yes, and then click OK at the bottom. And then when you come back to the main settings screen, you'll notice that there's a new section down here called Content Types. Now, this one already existed, and it's already been configured the way I want it. And you'll see that there are actually 3 things under content types. That means there are 3 templates associated with this library. The first one is called form. This is the default template, the stock template that SharePoint creates whenever you create a new form library. It's always called form. What I've done is added 2 additional ones. And you do that simply by clicking Add from Existing Site Content Types and then scrolling through the list that appears and selecting the ones that you want to add. So that's how I've added these 2 different templates and associated them with this library. Now you notice that only version 2, the newer template, is visible on the New button, and it is the default content type. The reason for this is that from here on out, we want all users to open up and fill out new customer contact forms using only the new template. So the old template is still here, because we want the existing old forms to open up using the old template. But we've deactivated that as far as being able to fill out new forms. So that when I go back to the library and I click Add Document to open up a new form, it's going to automatically open up version 2, the new version of the template. So this is a great way to preserve old forms that have already been filled out with the old template or the version 1 of your form template, then when you go in and you make changes, you can simply activate that new template as a content type to your library and the old template as a content type, and then make sure that all new forms are filled out with the new template. And that way all of your form data, old and new, are saved into the exact same library. Okay, so that's the side-by-side versioning. Let's take a look at the migrating with links technique. So let me go to, as soon as SharePoint decides to cooperate. It's being a bit cantankerous this morning. There we go. All right. Sorry for all these crashes, folks. We'll be back up and running in a couple of seconds. Okay. So let's take a look at the migrating with links technique. And what goes on here, I'm going to create a new form in the link source library, which is the library associated with the old version of the template. So I'm going to open up a new form here, and I'm just going to type whatever I want in these fields. This is just for test purposes. And we'll assume that this is the data that I entered to fill out my form. That's great. Now, what's going to happen when I click the Submit button is two things. It's going to submit this form to the old link source library, but it's also going to generate a rather complicated URL that, when clicked, will open up a new form using the new template in a different library called link target, and it's going to pull this information that's displayed here into that new form, into new fields, but pulling in the old data into those new fields. So let me click Submit, and as you see, here is this very long link, and I won't bother with the format of it. You can see that if you purchase the webinar kit or receive the webinar kit, you can open up the template and look at that formatting yourself. But I do want to draw your attention to the very end of the link where we see this ID parameter, and it's set to Gen 1. You can set this ID to whatever you want. It's good practice to make sure that the ID is some sort of a unique field. Obviously, Gen 1 is not a very unique value. Again, this is just for test purposes, but you'd probably be better off using something like date time, like the InfoPath Now function, to get the exact date time, which is more or less guaranteed to be unique for each form that gets created. So at any rate, you want to set this ID parameter. And this very long link that you see in field 4 also happens to be behind this actual hyperlink that you see here called My Wonderful Link. And the wonderful thing about this link is that when I click it, it's going to open up a new form using the new template in the new library, and it's going to pull in the old data and display it in that new form. So let's go ahead and click that and see it in action, which hopefully won't take too long. And once that data is there in the new form, you can simply click Submit to submit that new form with the same data that was in the old form, now in the new form, to the new form library. So you've essentially migrated the data from that old form into the new form. And here you see, here is the new form. You'll notice it is the new form because it says Target now. In the old form it said Source. Also the text here is a little different. And well, it looks like we've managed to pull in the first 2 bits of information from that old form. And there's probably something wrong with the logic in this particular template. That's why Gen 3 is not displaying down here. Sorry about that. And when I click Submit, it's going to take this information in the new form and submit it to the new library. And you'll see here's my new Gen 1 form, and I'm now in the link target library. So we've switched libraries to the new library with the new template, and we've pulled in the data and we've saved it in that new form. So let's take a closer look under the hood and see what's going on with this. So here is the link source, and I actually won't go into how this link is created. Again, we have some time constraints, but you can crack open this template and take a look at it. The interesting stuff goes on in the link target form. This is the new template. And over here, this technique uses Q rules. So I've switched to the Q rules secondary data source, and I'm going to click the finished loading node, which is where all the action goes on. And underneath here, we have a number of commands. The first command that runs when the form opens is a Q rules command called get input parameter. And this basically parses the URL that this new form has been opened up at. And it's looking for the parameter called ID. Remember when we looked at the link at the very end, there was that parameter called ID, and it was set equal to Gen 1. Well, this Q rules command automatically parses that link, and it pulls off the value that's assigned to this ID. And that value is important because then we are going to query the link source library, and we're going to find the particular form that was named Gen 1. Once we've found that form and we've pulled it in using this query, we are going to take some values from that form. Remember, there was a field 1 and a field 2 value. There was also a field 3. And we're going to set the name variable that is in the main data source for this new form. We're going to set that equal to the value of field 1 from the old form. And we're going to do the same thing down here. The phone variable, the phone field in the new form is going to be set to the value of field 2 from the old form. And there really should be a third one down here for location that should have said location equals to field 3. It looks like I forgot to put that in. So at any rate, that is how we're getting this information into the form. And one more important thing to point out is this information is actually coming from, let me find the link source library again. The information for field 1 and 2 and 3 is actually coming from the promoted properties associated with these forms. So here's the Gen 1 form in the link source library. This is the old template library, and here are these values that we've promoted so that they're available sitting in the library. So when that query happens in the link target template, it's actually querying the promoted properties here. So you're pulling in only the stuff that's been promoted. So whatever data you want to migrate over from the link source to the link target library needs to be a promoted property. That's one condition, one caveat on this technique. Okay, so that is the side-by-side versioning demo and the migrating with link demo. Let's take a look at two of the other techniques that we mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. And both of these use our DBXL software product that you can read more about on our website, Qdabra.com. And the first one we're going to look at is batch migration with the DBXL Migration Tool. So this is essentially a batch version of what you just saw us do with the, or what you just saw me do with the link library, where you had to open up each form, click that link to migrate the data over into the new form. Well, if you have 100 forms or 1,000 forms or 10,000 forms, that's going to take you forever. So what we suggest instead is storing your forms in DBXL instead of SharePoint. And you can still map your forms back to SharePoint as well. So you can store them in both SharePoint and DBXL. But the migration is going to happen inside DBXL. What you do is you create a custom XSL transform file. And I'll crack one of those open for you in a little bit. And then when you open up the migration tool, you simply tell it to apply that transform to all of the old forms in the old library and migrate all that data into new forms associated with a new template. and that's it. The last technique is migrating your form data. So this is not moving the forms over to a new template. This is moving the data inside the forms. And a lot of you are probably used to using databases for reporting. Some of you are probably familiar with SQL or with Access. What we can do, also using DBXL, is if you create a SQL database backend in the cloud with Windows Azure, we can use DBXL to map the data in the forms to this SQL database. And we can even put an Access report on the front end of this so that you can do nicely formatted reporting on top of the SQL database. Okay, let's take a look at these two techniques. We're going to look first at the DBXL Migration Tool. And let me quickly locate my demo files for this. So I'm going to open up DBXL, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, this is basically an enhancement to using InfoPath forms in SharePoint. It provides you with much more robust management of your forms and your templates. You can store far more forms per template. Within SharePoint, you have a 5,000 form limit per library. With DBXL, you can go upwards of 20,000. So I'm going to open up our DBXL administration tool, also called the DAT. And this will open up here in a couple of minutes. This is the main dashboard of the DBXL administration tool. And the form templates we're going to deal with are underneath this particular grouping. So we have client form, which is the old form template, and client form new, which as you probably guessed is the new form template. And we currently have 5 forms stored using the old template, and we have 11 forms stored using the new template, and we want to take these 5 forms and add them to those 11 and basically migrate that data so that all of our forms will now be stored in the new form template, using the new form template. And to do that, we are going to use the DBXL Migration Tool, which I am opening up as we speak. And here is the DBXL Migration Tool. It's got a nice, neat GUI interface. What we're going to do first is connect to the DAT, the DBXL Administration Tool, so that we have access to these form templates and the forms that are stored using them. So I'm going to connect here very quickly. All right, we are now connected, and then underneath the Other Operations tab, we click Transform and Migrate. And now all I need to do is tell it what is the old template, it's client form, what's the new template that I want to migrate my forms to, client form new, and then I need to select the XSL transform file that I mentioned before. So I'm going to browse real quickly to the one that I have in mind. Here it is, client form upgrade 2.xsl. And now all I have to do is click Run. And you can see that it's actually doing things down here on the little log display. When it's done, it'll give me, there we go, the pop-up that says Success. And now if I go back to the administration tool and I refresh this list, you should see this 11 go up to 16 to indicate that we have successfully migrated those 5 forms from the old template to the new template. Oops, I've got to open up that grouping again. And there we go. You see that we do have 16 documents in here now. And if I click this 16, it'll actually take me to the list of those documents. And down here you'll see these are the IDs that are automatically generated by DBXL to keep track of all of the documents, otherwise known as forms. DBXL calls them documents. SharePoint calls them forms. And you'll see that we have just added document IDs 1987 through 91. And those are those same 5 forms that were in the old template. And you can now go in and, if you want, delete these 5 forms. What the migration tool does is it basically copies the forms over from the old template to the new template, and it leaves the old ones there. You now have a choice to go in and simply delete those if you want, or keep them around for archiving purposes. Either way. Okay, so that's the batch migration with the DBXL Migration Tool. It did not matter that we had 5 forms here. We could have had 50 or 500 or 5,000. The DBXL Migration Tool would have migrated all of them over to the new template. Okay, and the last technique is the DBXL with Windows Azure. So now I'm going to, as soon as Microsoft Online decides to authenticate me, I am going to move over to the demo that I have set up for this. There we go. So here we have basically a stock expense report. This is now we're using SharePoint 2013. This is a cloud-based version of Office 365, and we have just a basic SharePoint form library with an expense report form. I'll open up one of those. And once I open up this form, you'll see that this is just sort of a stock expense report. And this particular expense report is stored using DBXL again, only this time it is a cloud-based version of DBXL. I'm going to open up the DBXL administration tool for this. And you'll be able to see that here we are. We're looking at this QD expense report sample. And if I take a look at the document catalog or the form catalog for this particular form template, you'll see that there are 2 forms here, or 2 documents here, just as there were 2 forms in the form library, which is somewhere. Hold on, let me get back to it. There we go. 2 forms in the form library, 2 documents in the DBXL administration tool, and we also have a SQL backend on this. And this is a version of SQL that is hosted in the cloud. Here I have a SQL Management Studio open right here. You can see the tables associated with this particular template. These are the tables that DBXL has mapped to in SQL. And I've simply run a simple script, a simple query on one of these tables, and you'll see that it reported back 2 results. Each one of these results corresponds to one of the forms in the form library. And on top of this SQL database, I have built a very pretty report in Access. And this Access report is basically running on the same table that I just showed you with a little more data. This is the data that's actually in the forms that's being displayed in this report. And again, we have 2 forms. Here's the top one, and information from the bottom form down here. So what I'm going to do is modify a field in this form and then submit it both to DBXL and to SharePoint, and then we'll see that change propagate all the way through the SQL database and into the Access report that's built on top of it. So let me make this change. Let me change the business purpose field. Webinars are fun. That sounds like a good thing to type there. So I'm going to go ahead and submit to DBXL and to the SharePoint library, all with one button click. Okay, that's done. If I close this form and then open up that report, you'll see that it did actually update the form that's stored in SharePoint. So one down. Let's go ahead and look at DBXL. Remember, we submitted to DBXL, and that business purpose field happens to be mapped to the description field here in DBXL. So I'm going to refresh this view, and you should see another demo change to webinars are fun. So yes, we did update the form information as stored in DBXL. And now remember, DBXL itself maps this data to the SQL tables for the SQL database that is hosted in the cloud with Windows Azure. So if I rerun this query, you should again see this purpose field update. Oops, let's try that again. There we go. And here we go. It updated. Webinars are fun. So the change is propagated all the way through to SQL. And because most of the time you'll probably be doing your reporting in something like Access as opposed to digging directly into the SQL database, if we refresh the view on this Access report, again, the purpose field on this particular entry changed. It now says webinars are fun. So the nice thing about using this cloud-based version or cloud-enabled version of DBXL, you don't need to stand up your own SQL databases yourself on your own servers. You can sign up for a Windows Azure account and host your databases in the cloud. You can build Access reports on top of them, and with DBXL you can propagate the information from your forms that are hosted in SharePoint to DBXL through to the SQL database and have those changes reflected in whatever reports you've built on top of that database. So this is a really powerful technique for taking changes that your users will make in SharePoint, because they know SharePoint, they know the SharePoint interface. They'll make those changes in InfoPath through your SharePoint site, and on the back end you can do your reporting automatically without a hitch. Okay, well, that concludes today's webinar. If you provide feedback at the end of the webinar when the session ends, you will obtain the form templates that I've shown here today, as well as the slides. If you know someone else who'd be interested in this who didn't attend the webinar, it's just $29 to purchase this from the Qdabra web store. And you have the option of subscribing annually for $199 to get all of them for free. So if you miss a few webinars or you're out sick, you can still get all of the webinar kits. All right, thank you very much. And if there are no questions, make sure to send us your feedback at the end of the webinar. You'll be presented with a feedback form. Please fill that out. If you do, you will get today's presentation and the demo InfoPath templates for free.